So in this video, I'm going to talk about the struggles of being a parent of a child with special needs, and then give you some ways that I overcame those struggles, through God and through His Word and things like that. And so my daughter was shaken, and her diagnosis was seizures, cerebral palsy, gastroparesis. She was blinded by the injury. She was fed through a tube 24/7 that was a GJ tube, went through directly into her intestines. It bypassed her stomach. She couldn't have anything by mouth. She really couldn't do anything but lay in her bed. And so I have my notes here so I don't get off track. So basically, I was a single mom overnight to 2 kids when this happened, because it was my now ex-husband who ended up being, investigated and blamed for shaking her, because he was alone with her the night that all of this happened. And so I went from having, somewhat of a husband and 2 incomes, things like that, a house, all of those things, to having none of that basically overnight when this happened. And so that in itself was a big struggle. I went and I did not have, because of the way my relationship was with him, I didn't have many friends. I didn't have much support other than some family and some church people and, things like that. So that was a big struggle, to not be able to work anymore, because she required me to be there as her caregiver 24/7, especially in those beginning, times with her diagnosis and everything. And there was some state financial help, but it wasn't near enough to sustain any type of, home and things like that. So, I really had to provide for myself and 2 kids. I had an older child as well, and learn how to do that with, my single income, because they took custody from my ex-husband and gave full custody to me. And so he did pay a very small amount of child support, but other than that, it was all on me to provide. So also trying to work full-time, be her full-time caregiver. I didn't have anyone that could, babysit her for me all the time for me to go to work. And so eventually I found out that I could have nursing care. So we got some nursing care to help me to be able to go back to work some, and that was a huge blessing. But the hospital stays were extremely difficult, going through having to be away from my older daughter, have to find someone else to keep her that entire time. And by hospital stays, I'm talking there was one of them that was 90 days long. And most of them weren't just a few days, because if she was sick, she was very sick, not just, something minor going on. It was, you're going to be in the hospital at least a week or 2 or longer. And so the nursing care would not pay the nurses to go into the hospital and sit with her while I went to work. So even though when you're in the hospital with a child, you can't leave them alone, they're minors, you can't leave them alone. I wouldn't have wanted to do that anyway, but there's not just one nurse for each patient unless you're in the ICU or something. So if she was in the ICU, I could come and go, but it was still very difficult to leave her and go to work for 8 hours or longer, And so the nurses, when we were on a regular floor, her home care nurses couldn't come in and sit with her or anything like that. So I had to rely on volunteers. I had to rely on just posting to social media, asking if anyone could come help me, because I didn't have a big community at the time. I didn't have a lot of friends. I wasn't really involved in church a lot during that time. So I didn't have this, a lot of people around me who could help me through that. And so now looking back, I know how important that is. And I strongly suggest, no matter what situation you're in, you don't have to have a special needs child, but to build a community around you, because you never know who might need you in a time like that. When, I needed people, that could be someone needing you right now. Or when you might need people, because you never know what could happen. So the community, I wish I would have had, but I didn't have at that time. And so, I would have some people who would write me back on social media, and I knew them, I was at least acquaintance, and I can't say that word for some reason, with them. So it wasn't like total strangers, but they would come in and be like, okay, I can come for 3 hours or so. And so those types of visits would allow me to, go and do some errands or something, but it wasn't enough to like go to work and things like that. So it was a big struggle. And I know that a lot of caregivers can probably relate to that, whether you're at home or in the hospital, but the hospital just seems to make it a lot worse. So the struggle is not being able to go to work, which means you're not making any income, which means you can't pay your bills, and there's just it affects so many things when you're going through that. And so I would have to rely on people to help me pay my bills. So if I couldn't go to work because of, the lack of like help to come sit with her, and it was also intimidating to sit with her. So, you had to find someone who was not too intimidated by a special needs child or a child in her situation to come sit. So it had to be like a special person. It couldn't just be anybody. So, it was a struggle to pay bills. So I had a daughter in daycare that I was trying to pay for, and there's a lot of state help that you can get if you are financially in need. But this situation is unique because whenever I did have nursing care and we were out of the hospital, I could pay for things. And there's a income limit that you can't cross or whatever, or you can't have all of these, state government funded resources. And so I was a licensed massage therapist and I made pretty good money. And so whenever we weren't in the hospital or something like that was going on, I was able to pretty much easily pay our bills and things like that. So there was no, great need for those things. I didn't have enough to like save up a bunch of money to be able to save for these rainy days in the hospital. But, there was nothing that I could find other than some churches that would help pay certain bills that would be like, okay, you have to be off work for basically 3 months straight in the hospital with your child. Here's some financial help, because you don't need it all the time. You don't need it 12 months out of the year. You just need it right now when your child's in the hospital. And I was looking around like, I don't know where to get that kind of help. There just wasn't that kind of thing. And the church that I attended and stuff would sometimes like donate money. I would have to try to raise some on GoFundMe, things like that. And one church would like call the daycare and pay for the daycare bill, or they would pay my rent that month. There's things like that. But I was looking around like, somebody has to take care of this need. Like, there needs to be something in place to where if a family is going through something like this, they don't usually need financial help, but they do right now. And so where can they go? And so, that's exactly why my husband and I recently launched a beeswax candle company, because we wanted some type of product to bring in income to be able to donate a percentage of that net profit for that exact thing. So I'll link that in the description if you're interested in purchasing. Part of what you purchase does go to helping families in that exact situation where they don't always need help, but they can come to us, and a part of our net profit goes to them. So some other struggles as special needs mom was the mental and spiritual struggles. There's lots of mental things going on whenever you have to watch your child suffer, whenever you have to think about what your child could be doing if this didn't happen to them, and, thinking about the siblings and how they wish they had a sibling to play with. Like, my older daughter always wished she had a sibling to play with, but she didn't because her sibling could no longer, do anything with her. So there's a lot of mental and spiritual struggles going through all of that. And so some things that I did constantly to help me stay mentally sane and, stay strong in my faith was, the first thing that I would do in the morning would be put headphones. I had some Bluetooth headphones. I would roll over. Usually didn't want to get out of bed, because if you're going through something so difficult and so mentally straining, it's easy to want to just stay in bed and not get up and not do anything and just sleep it off. And so I would have to roll over, get my headphones, turn on something completely uplifting. And that would usually be a sermon, or I had, these little specific, like, I typed in Stephen Furtick motivational speeches. And so there was some music that he had applied to a background to one of his sermons and stuff. And so it would like pump me up to get out of bed. And I had to do that to get out of bed. I wasn't able to just do it on my own. And so if you're struggling to get out of bed in the mornings and stuff like that because of what you're going through, there's a tip for you. And then when I had a nurse, so whenever we had a nurse come in around 7 a.m., I would be prepared to take my older daughter to daycare. And if I didn't have work, or if I had work later on in the day, I would go out and be in nature. And I even bought like a heated jacket and stuff so that I can be in nature, even if it's cold outside and stuff. Because when you get into nature, it really helps you to take the focus off of yourself. It helps you to take the focus off of everything else and focus on you and God. And it's a great way to just get into prayer and to, really renew your mind like the Bible tells us to do. And so I had that discipline because I didn't always want to go. But I knew that if I went and spent that time there, that my mental, mindset and capacity to handle things would be better. And I would take my Bible and just really spend that time with God and not miss it. And so, writing in a prayer journal. I have a specific prayer journal that I created. I'll link it in the description, based off of those times that I can think back to writing out prayers. And I'm really glad that I did that now, because now I can go back and see, wow, look at what I went through. Like, man, God got me through that. It was in his strength, not my strength. And if he did it, then he's going to do it now. So any situation that I have now feels, it still feels intense and it still hurts whenever you go through certain things. But I can look back and see that God did it then and he'll do it now. And so we're going to get through it in any situation. And then just like riding around in the car and crying if I needed to cry. So I didn't have a lot of privacy. I always had a nurse, or not always had a nurse, but a lot of the times I had a nurse. And if the nurse wasn't there, then my older daughter was there. And she was too young to understand what was going on, but I didn't want to be crying in front of her all the time. Every time I needed to cry, I didn't want to just be up and crying in front of her and then trying to explain it to her. Even though it's good, I think, for them to see you releasing emotions, at least sometimes. But, so I would just get in my car and I would find a road that didn't have too much traffic on it. And I would go and either listen to some worship music or a sermon or just in silence. And I would just let my emotions out. If it was weighing heavy on me that day, I would go and just let myself cry. And I would pray out loud and talk to God. And those were some intense prayers. Some of the most intense prayers of my life were in the car, crying out to God and just, allowing him to comfort me and to remind me that I can do everything in his strength, that he's going to give me his strength. I don't have to rely on my own strength. And in fact, relying on your own strength is what gets you in trouble, because I know that every time I rely on my strength and not God's strength, that I will get down and mentally, my mindset will be messed up when I'm trying to rely on myself too much and what I can do in my own strength, because we're very limited as human beings. We can't rely on ourselves all the time. And so relying on God and his strengths and his abilities, because they're limitless. And, sometimes it took releasing all those emotions to allow myself to be like, okay, I'm going to lean on God's strength. I'm going to lean on his abilities, because he is the God of impossibilities. Like, he makes the impossible possible. So why wouldn't I lean on him? He has unlimited resources. Like, he is the one who can get me through this. And all I have to do is just be still in some, scenarios. And so just going through, first of all, going on a drive can just be, like renewing and refreshing anyway, because you're by yourself and you get to spend that alone time. And, I really enjoy even now spending time with my husband. I feel like I could be around him all the time because of who he is. And I just enjoy being around him. But I still have to make time to be alone with God. And that was something that really got me through my darkest moments. And like Jesus gives plenty of examples in the Bible of going to be alone and kind of putting the emphasis on being alone with God and in prayer. And so I have found that no matter what the situation was, doing that did help. And so I want to encourage you to, even if you have a lot of kids, I have an 1.5-year-old, I have an 8-year-old, my husband, we have a lot going on, but you can be disciplined in this to make sure that you get that time. Ask someone for help. If it can't be your husband, ask someone, for at least a little bit of time to be in prayer alone with God. And I have found that even though I trust my husband and I feel like I can be myself around him, that there are just some things that I only want to release and talk about with God and no one else, not even him. So those are the things that helped me get through a lot of very difficult times with my daughter. And I hope this video was helpful. I will see you on the next video.